Main Street shimmered under the merciless Texas sun, but no one noticed the heat when they saw a child fleeing for her life. Little Isolde Thornwyck, only 4 years old, sprinted barefoot down the faded yellow line, her gray shirt clinging to her back, her small face stained with tears and dust, her hair, tied in a messy ponytail, whipped behind her as she dared one terrified glance over her shoulder. What she saw made her heart nearly stop. 4 armed soldiers and a massive German shepherd named Thorin, closing the distance fast. Leading them was Magnus Everhart, a hardened commander whose voice alone could silence chaos. Beside him ran Seraphine Wraithmoor, calm and calculating even now, her eyes locked on Isolde's tiny figure. Thorin Vexley, the youngest, stumbled briefly as he fought to keep pace, sweat stinging his eyes. Rhett Blackwater, Magnus' right hand, stayed a step behind, scanning every doorway for threats no one else could see. But today, the greatest danger wasn't hiding in the shadows. It was the secret clutched tight in Isolde's small mind. Neighbors peeked from windows and porches, frozen in disbelief. Whispers tangled with the cicadas' drone. Why is she running? What did she see? Why are Everhart's men after a child? But no one dared step onto the street. Not when Thorin's bark thundered through the humid air like a warning of something much bigger than a chase. Isolde stumbled over a crack in the asphalt, scraping her knee. A choked sob broke from her chest, but she forced herself back up, tiny hands pushing against the blistering road. "Daddy! Daddy!" she whimpered to the empty air. But Corvin Ashbourne, the father she barely remembered, was nowhere to be found. Only the pounding footsteps and Thorin's heavy breath at her heels. Seeing her falter, Magnus barked an order without looking back. "Hold your line. Don't spook Thorin. We need the girl alive." Seraphine's jaw clenched at the word alive. She hated this. She hated that it had come to this. But she ran on, rifle bouncing against her shoulder with each stride, her eyes flicking to Magnus for answers he wouldn't give. As Isolde collapsed again, too exhausted to rise, Thorin reached her first. But instead of attacking, the loyal shepherd whined and licked her salty tears, curling protectively at her side. Magnus dropped to one knee, scooping the sobbing girl into his arms, feeling her heartbeat hammer against his chest. Over her tiny shoulder, he caught Rhett's grim look. They all knew this chase was just the beginning. Somewhere, Corvin Ashbourne's ghost still held a truth dangerous enough to shatter them all. Magnus Everhart carried Isolde Thornwyck through the sweltering street as the curious eyes of neighbors burned into his back. Thorin trotted beside them, tail low but eyes alert, still guarding the trembling child as if she were his own pup. Behind them, Seraphine Wraithmoor signaled to Thorin Vexley and Rhett Blackwater to form a loose perimeter, her sharp gaze daring any bystander to step closer. For a fleeting moment, Magnus wished these people knew the truth, that they weren't here to harm Isolde but to keep her from vanishing like her father, Corvin Ashbourne, once did. Inside the abandoned hardware store they'd claimed as a temporary base, the air smelled of rust and old oil. Magnus laid Isolde on a dusty tarp, his gloved hand brushing sweaty hair from her forehead. She flinched at his touch, whispering words only a child lost in fear could form. He exchanged a look with Rhett, whose eyes held the same question gnawing at Magnus' mind. How much does she really know? Seraphine crouched beside the girl, her voice calm but edged with urgency. "Isolde, sweetheart, can you tell me where your mommy is? Or where Daddy told you to hide?" At the mention of Corvin, the little girl squeezed her eyes shut, tears leaking into her tangled hair. Thorin pressed his snout against her side, whining softly as if trying to answer for her. Thorin paced near the window, peering through cracked blinds at the gathering cluster of townsfolk. Their murmurs drifted inside. Words like kidnap, military secrets, and Corvin Ashbourne's name spoken like a curse. Thorin's hands shook against the windowsill. He'd signed up to fight enemies overseas, not drag crying children from streets while neighbors filmed every move. He muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "They're going to turn on us. We're the monsters now." Rhett's voice cut through the tension. "Magnus, we can't stay here. Sheriff Harlan Stormrider will come knocking soon, and you know he doesn't like surprises." The thought of the local sheriff sniffing around their operation made Seraphine's jaw tighten. Harlan Stormrider was no fool. He'd ask questions that Magnus wasn't ready to answer. Not yet. Magnus stood, casting one last glance at the shivering child and the loyal dog curled around her. He felt the weight of Orion Lockridge's orders pressing down on his shoulders like an iron collar. Retrieve the girl. Control the story. Eliminate the threat. But as Isolde's small hand clutched his sleeve in her sleep, Magnus knew one thing for certain. This mission was about to drag every secret Corvin Ashbourne left behind into the light, whether they were ready or not. The dusty air inside the hardware store grew heavier as dusk crept through the broken windows. Rhett Blackwater kept watch at the back exit, his hand never leaving the grip of his rifle. Every distant car door slam made Dorian Vexley flinch, his nerves raw from too many days without sleep. In a dark corner, Seraphine Wraithmoor scribbled notes on a battered notepad, piecing together the fragments they had about Corvin Ashbourne's final months. But every answer just led to a bigger question. Thorin lay curled protectively around little Isolde Thornwyck, who now slept under a threadbare blanket. Every few minutes she whimpered her father's name in her dreams, the sound cutting deeper into Magnus Everhart than he cared to admit. He stood near the door, silhouetted against the fading sun, trying to decide which was more dangerous, the child's hidden truth or the town's growing suspicion. A sharp rap on the plywood door snapped everyone to attention. Rhett cocked his rifle, but Magnus motioned him to lower it. He stepped forward, swung the door open just enough to see the broad frame of Sheriff Harlan Stormrider filling the doorway. The sheriff's eyes flicked past Magnus' shoulder, catching a glimpse of Seraphine's gear and Dorian's drawn face before settling back on Magnus with a grim frown. "Magnus Everhart," Harlan growled, voice low but steady. "I got townsfolk whispering about soldiers chasing babies down Main Street like fugitives. You want to tell me what the hell's going on in my town before I start dragging you in for questioning myself?" Magnus didn't flinch. He stepped outside, pulling the door nearly shut behind him to block Harlan's view of Isolde. The evening breeze did nothing to cool the heat between the two men. "Harlan, you know me. I wouldn't risk this mess unless I had no choice. There are things about Corvin Ashbourne you don't understand. Things that could tear this place apart if we don't contain them." Harlan's eyes narrowed. "Don't play me for a fool, Magnus. That girl's mother, Isolde Thornwyck. She's gone. And her father's a ghost folks swear is dead. But you and your people are stomping through backyards with guns. Tell me now, is this girl bait? Or a witness?" Inside, Seraphine pressed her ear to the door, catching every word. She knew this was the moment everything could unravel. One wrong answer, and Sheriff Stormrider would drag this operation into daylight. Magnus took a slow breath, choosing his lie carefully. "She's the only thread we have to find Corvin. If we lose her, we lose everything. You want your town safe? Let me do this my way." Sheriff Harlan Stormrider didn't answer Magnus Everhart right away. He studied the soldier's face, searching for cracks behind that hardened mask. A warm wind tugged at the brim of his hat as dusk deepened into night, the first stars flickering above the old buildings of town. Somewhere inside that hardware store, a terrified child was dreaming of a father the world believed dead, and Harlan suspected she knew far more than any grown man would admit. Inside, Seraphine Wraithmoor kept her ear pressed to the door until the faint murmur of voices outside faded. She turned back to Dorian Vexley and Rhett Blackwater, her eyes sharp. "Pack up what you can carry. If Stormrider pushes back, we'll need to move her tonight." Thorin stays close to the girl. He's the only one she trusts right now. Thorin, sensing his name, lifted his head, ears flicking. Beside him, Isolde Thornwyck stirred, tiny fingers gripping the blanket as nightmares flickered behind her closed eyes. Dorian knelt next to her, guilt gnawing at him. He had joined Magnus' team to fight enemies overseas, not to guard secrets in small towns or chase children down backstreets. He brushed a strand of hair from Isolde's damp forehead, whispering softly, "You deserve better than this, little star. I promise, I won't let them break you." His promise drifted away like smoke in the stale air. Outside, Harlan crossed his arms over his chest, voice low and calm. "Magnus, If you drag this mess through my town without my blessing, we'll have more than angry neighbors to worry about. People around here loved Corvin Ashbourne once. He saved half this town when the flood came. If they find out you're keeping secrets about him, you'll have a riot on your hands." Magnus exhaled slowly, fighting the urge to tell Harlan everything. But Orion Lockridge's voice haunted him. "Control the story, or you'll be buried with it. Listen to me, Harlan. Corvin Ashbourne was not the man everyone remembers. He buried things under that perfect smile. If Isolde tells the wrong soul, innocents die. Give me 2 more days, then you'll have my word. I'll leave this town cleaner than I found it." Harlan spat on the gravel, eyes locked on Magnus. 2 days, Everhart. After that, I swear on my badge, I'll drag you, your people, and whatever truth you're hiding right into my jail cell for the whole county to see." He turned on his heel, boots crunching down the dark street, leaving Magnus staring at the stars, wondering how many more lies it would take to keep a single terrified child safe from the truth that would destroy them all. The night swallowed the last warmth of the day as Magnus Everhart stepped back inside the hardware store. He found Seraphine Wraithmoor hunched over a spread of old maps and hastily scribbled notes, lit by a single flickering lantern. Rhett Blackwater leaned against a shelf behind her, arms crossed, eyes sharp but weary. Dorian Vexley sat on the floor next to Isolde Thornwyck and Thorin, softly humming to keep the girls' dreams from sliding back into nightmares. Magnus dropped to one knee, brushing his hand over Thorin's head. The loyal shepherd licked his palm in quiet reassurance. Isolde stirred at his touch but didn't wake. Exhaustion had finally overpowered her fear. Magnus' voice was gravel-low. "Stormrider gave us 2 days. That's all the time we have to figure out where Corvin hid whatever they're willing to kill for." Seraphine didn't look up from her notes. Corvin was meticulous, paranoid, even. He wouldn't leave anything in a bank or safe. If there's proof of what he did, or where he went, it's hidden somewhere personal. She tapped her pen against a sketch of Corvin's old farmhouse, now boarded up and watched day and night by townsfolk who believed ghosts still lingered there. Rhett shifted, the old floorboards groaning under his boots. "That house is a powder keg. If we go poking around, half the county will be at our throats by sunrise. And Isolde? She'll be our only guide in there. That's a risk." He glanced down at the sleeping child, the innocence on her face so painfully at odds with the secrets tangled in her bloodline. Dorian's voice cut through the heavy air, softer than usual but resolute. "We owe her the truth. She's more than bait. She's Corvin's daughter. She deserves to know why her father vanished and why strangers with guns keep dragging her from one safe house to the next. If she has a memory, a clue, we need to earn it from her, not yank it out while she's terrified." Magnus rubbed his temples, the weight of Orion Lockridge's last threat pounding behind his eyes. "Bring me proof or don't bother coming back." He looked at Seraphine, at Rhett, at Dorian, and finally at the small shape curled against Thorin's warm fur. "At first light, we moved to that house. No more hiding. If Corvin buried the truth under his own floorboards, we dig it up ourselves. And if we don't make it back before Stormrider comes knocking." His words trailed off into silence that none of them dared break. Outside, the wind rattled the boarded windows like a warning. Dawn crept in slow and gray over Ashbourne's old farmhouse. Its rotting porch sagged beneath layers of peeling white paint, and the yard was a tangle of weeds high enough to hide secrets of their own. Magnus Everhart crouched behind a crumbling stone wall at the edge of the property, scanning the windows through the scope of his rifle. Beside him, Seraphine Wraithmoor checked the ammo in her sidearm, her breath forming tiny clouds in the cool morning air. Behind them, Rhett Blackwater guided Isolde Thornwyck through the dew-soaked grass, Thorin padding close at her side. The child clutched a battered stuffed rabbit to her chest, the only comfort she'd allowed herself since leaving town. Dorian Vexley brought up the rear, nerves raw but eyes fixed on Isolde, ready to pull her back at the slightest hint of danger. To them, this was no ordinary house. It was the last puzzle box Corvin Ashbourne had left behind. Magnus held up a fist. Everyone froze. He turned to Isolde, lowering his voice. "Isolde, do you remember where Daddy kept his special things?" Anything he told you to never touch. The girl's wide eyes darted to the sagging front door, then to a cracked window near the ground. She pointed a small, trembling finger at the basement window. Her whisper barely carried over the rustle of the weeds. Under the floor. Daddy said the monsters can't find it there. Seraphine's eyes met Magnus. He used her as a vault, she murmured, bitterness creeping into her tone. Dorian's stomach turned at the thought. Corvin had hidden his sins behind a child's memory. Thorin let out a low whine, nudging Isolde gently, sensing the child's fear bloom all over again. They slipped through the back, boards groaning under careful boots. The house smelled of mold and old secrets, dust motes dancing in the early light that filtered through grimy windows. Magnus led them straight to the basement door. It stuck in its frame until Rhett forced it open with his shoulder, the sound echoing through the hollow halls like a shot. Isolde clung to Thorin's neck as the men descended into the damp, dark belly of Corvin Ashbourne's world. In the cold basement, Magnus flicked his flashlight across the cracked concrete until it caught the faint outline of a trapdoor half buried under old crates. His heart pounded as he dropped to his knees and pried at the edges. He could almost hear Orion Lockridge's voice whispering promises of redemption or ruin. As the hidden door creaked open, the smell of stale earth rose to meet him, along with something else he hadn't expected. The sharp, metallic tang of fear long forgotten but not forgiven. The trapdoor groaned louder than a rifle shot in the silent basement. Magnus Everhart lifted the warped wood, revealing a narrow pit shored up with old timber beams. A cold breath of damp air drifted upward, carrying the scent of mold, earth, and something older, secrets buried where daylight couldn't reach. He flicked his flashlight inside, the beam trembling slightly in his grasp. Below, a crude wooden box lay half buried in the dirt, its lid split and warped by years of hidden shame. Seraphine Wraithmoor crouched beside Magnus, eyes scanning every corner of the pit. Her voice was low, edged with the anger she rarely let slip. Corvin Ashbourne trusted no one but himself, not even his own wife. He locked his life away in the ground and made his daughter the only key. Behind them, Rhett Blackwater watched the basement stairs, rifle raised, eyes darting between the darkness above and the secrets below. Dorian Vexley held Isolde Thornwyck tight against his chest, trying to shield her eyes from the growing tension. Thorin pressed close to her side, his steady breathing a quiet promise of protection. Isolde peered past Dorian's shoulder, her small voice drifting into the musty room. Daddy said monsters can't open boxes. Only me. Her words made Dorian's skin crawl. What kind of father binds a child's innocence to a trapdoor full of ghosts? Magnus knelt and dragged the box out of the pit. It scraped over the cold dirt with a sound that reminded him of a coffin dragged from a grave. He forced the warped lid open, his heart thudding louder with every inch. Inside, under a layer of oilcloth and rotting papers, lay a battered metal case stamped with Corvin's old unit insignia. Next to it, bundled in plastic, were stacks of files marked with words that made Seraphine suck in a sharp breath. Operation Gravesend. Rhett swore under his breath. He didn't just go rogue, Magnus. He documented everything: missions, names, payoffs, betrayal. If Orion Lockridge finds out we have this before he does. He let the thought hang in the damp air. The weight of treason and blackmail pressed down on them all at once. Magnus shut the lid with a quiet thud, his mind already racing through options. Above them, a floorboard creaked. Not the house settling, but boots moving where they shouldn't be. He held up a hand, finger to his lips. Thorin's ears perked, his low growl rumbling through the basement. They weren't alone anymore. And now, with Corvin Ashbourne's sins in their hands, the real hunt had begun. The creak of footsteps above grew louder, slow and deliberate. Magnus Everhart pressed his finger to his lips again, eyes locked on Seraphine Wraithmoor's tense face. Rhett Blackwater flattened himself against the basement wall, his rifle trained on the narrow staircase. Dorian Vexley tightened his arms around Isolde Thornwyck, whispering soft reassurances she barely heard over the drum of her own heartbeat. Beside her, Thorin's growl deepened, hackles rising as his nose twitched at a scent no human could detect yet. A muffled voice echoed from upstairs. A low command, cold and unmistakable. Magnus' pulse slammed in his temples. Orion Lockridge. The man had arrived sooner than expected, bringing with him a squad trained to wipe mistakes off the map. 2 days? Magnus thought bitterly. I couldn't even keep that promise. He motioned for Rhett to kill the lantern. Darkness swallowed the basement, broken only by the thin beam of Magnus' flashlight against the dirt floor. Seraphine's breath brushed his ear as she leaned close. If Lockridge gets that box, we're ghosts. You know that, right? Magnus nodded, mind racing through options that narrowed by the second. There was no back door down here, only the stairs up, where Lockridge's men were already closing in. His eyes fell to the pit. It wasn't an exit, but maybe it could hide what they couldn't carry. Rhett muttered, "We can't shoot our way out with her here. She'll get caught in the crossfire." His gaze flicked to Isolde, so small in Dorian's arms yet carrying the power to ruin or save them all. Thorin pressed tighter against her side, a silent guardian made of muscle and old loyalty. A sudden thud upstairs, then silence. Magnus knew what that meant. Lockridge wasn't here to talk. He was here to erase loose ends. He knelt by the pit again, shoving the box back into the earth, throwing broken boards and crates on top to hide any sign of fresh disturbance. We can't take it. We bury it for now. Priority is her. We move when they breach, and we don't split up. Dorian tightened his grip on Isolde, feeling her tiny hands clutch his collar. Her wide eyes met Magnus in the dark, full of an understanding no child should have. Thorin snarled low, teeth flashing in the gloom. Above them, floorboards groaned under booted feet. Magnus felt the old farmhouse hold its breath, and then exhale all at once as a heavy boot crashed through the basement door, shattering the last illusion that they had any way out. The basement door exploded inward, splinters raining down the old wooden steps. Light from tactical flashlights cut through the musty dark, blinding everyone for a heartbeat. Magnus Everhart shielded his eyes just long enough to spot the first black-clad figure stepping through the broken frame, unmistakable in posture and presence. Orion Lockridge himself, flanked by 2 silent operatives armed to the teeth. Seraphine Wraithmoor raised her weapon, but Magnus' sharp gesture froze her in place. One wrong trigger pull and Isolde Thornwyck would be the first casualty. Thorin bristled beside the girl, low growls vibrating against Dorian Vexley's chest as he tightened his hold around her. Rhett Blackwater, half hidden behind an old water heater, waited for Magnus' signal. Finger poised on the trigger, he prayed he wouldn't have to squeeze. Lockridge's voice rolled down the steps, smooth as oil but colder than the grave. Magnus Everhart, always the hero in the wrong story. Step aside. I only want what Ashbourne hid and the girl. After that, you can crawl back to whatever gutter you think you call home. He smiled then, but it never reached his eyes. His operatives spread out, weapons aimed, waiting for a flicker of defiance. Magnus didn't move. His body blocked the pit where Corvin's secrets slept once more under dirt and broken crates. His mind replayed every choice that had brought him here, the orders, the lies, the child now clutching Dorian's collar with shaking hands. He felt Seraphine's breath behind him, tense, waiting for his call. Rhett shifted his weight, preparing for the fight they could not win but would not run from. Isolde's small voice cut through the standoff like a blade. "He told me not to tell you," she whispered, so soft yet sharp enough to make Lockridge's smile fade. Thorin pressed tighter to her side, teeth bared, ready to protect her with his last breath. Dorian whispered in her ear, "Stay very still, little star, no matter what happens." He could feel her heartbeat against his ribs, a drumbeat of innocent terror. Lockridge stepped closer, boots echoing on the concrete floor. "Isolde, sweetheart," he cooed, venom hidden behind false kindness. "Your father lied to you. Magnus lies to you. Tell me where the box is, and I promise, no one here will get hurt." But in Lockridge's eyes, Magnus saw only the truth. If she spoke, they were all already dead. Magnus squared his shoulders, a silent vow forming behind gritted teeth. If this is where it ends, so be it, but not without a fight. And as the basement filled with the metallic click of safety's off, the air seemed to freeze, waiting for the storm to break. For a heartbeat, the basement was frozen in a breathless standoff. Magnus Everhart's eyes locked with Orion Lockridge's, Seraphine Wraithmoor's finger tightening on the trigger, Rhett Blackwater bracing for the recoil he knew would come too soon. Dorian Vexley felt Isolde Thornwyck's tiny hands digging into his shoulder, her silent fear bleeding into his bones. Beside her, Thorin's growl deepened into a sound that promised blood. Lockridge tilted his head, mocking softness in every word. Last chance, Magnus. Step aside. No more blood, no more lies. Just give me the child, and the truth her father buried with her mind. Magnus' heart pounded so loud it drowned out the distant hum of the town waking above them. He saw then what Corvin Ashbourne had feared most. Not monsters in the dark, but men like Lockridge who built cages with secrets and called them protection. A single bark shattered the moment. Thorin lunged, muscle and teeth colliding with the nearest operative, dragging him to the ground in a whirlwind of snarls and muffled screams. The gunshot that followed ricocheted through the cramped basement, deafening and final. Chaos exploded. Seraphine fired first, clean and precise. Rhett flanked left, his rifle spitting fire. Dorian flattened himself over Isolde, his body a shield, whispering over and over, "Stay down, little star. Stay down." Magnus moved like a storm unleashed. He slammed into Lockridge, both men crashing into the pit Corvin had dug so long ago. They grappled among crates and loose dirt, fists landing with sickening thuds. Lockridge fought like a cornered wolf, but Magnus' rage was older, deeper, fed by every lie he'd been forced to swallow. A sharp crack echoed as Magnus drove Lockridge's head against a crate edge, once, twice, until the other man went limp, breath rattling in his throat. Silence fell like a curtain after the last gunshot faded. Thorin limped back to Isolde's side, muzzle streaked with blood that wasn't his. Rhett checked the bodies, his chest heaving. Seraphine lowered her pistol, eyes locked on Magnus, who climbed out of the pit dragging Lockridge's empty stare with him. He looked at her, then at Dorian cradling the crying child. In that moment everything else, the secrets, the orders, the blood, dissolved. Magnus knelt before Isolde, brushing a trembling hand through her hair. "It's over, little one. No more monsters. No more running." Isolde pressed her tear-soaked face into Thorin's fur. Above them, dawn filtered through the basement windows, soft and warm, washing the blood and shadows in gold. And though the past would never let them rest entirely, they knew this. The truth stayed buried, but the girl was free, and for Magnus Everhart, that was the only battle worth winning.